Hi, everybody. Just so that I can warn you, I'm a terrible public speaker, so just bear with me. Okay, so just a little bit about the IDF. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it before, but they basically are a non-profit that was established in Denmark in 2002. They were actually inspired by the Scandinavian educational system, which was to create low-cost and high-quality education and to change the way that people design. So over the decade, IDF has built a sustainable collaboration and education platform and has grown the global community to over 475 groups in 84 countries, with our South African group being number 21 globally and number 1 in Africa. Okay, so let me just, oops, now I've got to double check here. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this evening we have so if you guys don't understand how, because you've never been there before, so the way the IDF groups work is that each month, first Tuesday of every month, we have a different topic based on what's relevant in the design industry, covering the spectrum of design, development, as well as business. Because in general, all those three industries need to work 100% better in order to create the best output. So if each of us actually understands the different disciplines, we'll work more effectively together. Does that make sense? Yeah. So each group will be basically from a different perspective. So this evening, obviously from a design dev type of perspective, and mix of UI and UX, sorry. So Retro Rabbit team seems to cover a much broader spectrum because they cover research, design, as well as development. So they've got a more holistic view of the problem. Then, sorry. So a bit about Lizette, if you haven't read the meetup details, she's a senior experienced designer, and I lost her info, sorry. Yeah, she's a senior experienced designer and head of design at Retro Rabbit. She's passionate about human-centered design research and collaboration with developers. She's summited Mount Kilimanjaro. Is that a joke? Is that for real? And she has a master's degree in information design and is currently working on a PhD proposal. She also plays violin in the Pretoria Symphony Orchestra and strives to create beautiful and intuitive experiences on any platform, and to always fight for the people that will actually be using the solutions we create. So you're a unicorn. Okay, so I think it's okay if we hand over to you now before I mess up this presentation even further.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz. Welcome to Retro. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. So let me get to my presentation. So the thing I'm talking about tonight is a chatbot that we created for Liberty short-term insurance. It's a product that has recently gone into market, only the first phase. So it's still a very staggered approach. It is in public domain, so you guys are welcome to go and check it out, play around with it. But the full thing is only launching later this year. Now, what makes chatbots a very interesting field to look at is chatbots is quite a buzzword in any community that you can think of. Everyone keeps using the word chatbot, and they like to say that, oh, but they're going to use chatbots, and it's going to be new and innovative. And it is a bit of a novelty thing, but there are legitimate reasons for using it though. So when our client approached us, they specifically told us they wanted to use a chatbot. And the reasoning for that was, first of all, it's available 24/7. So if you think of short-term insurance, which for our first phase is car insurance, it would usually be taken out by a call center agent. So that's someone who isn't always available, they can't always answer your questions. Chatbots they don't get tired of answering the same questions over and over. It's very flexible, so you can program it whatever way you want to have the conversation. It's also a standardized experience. Again, when you look at call centers, it can vary very much depending on whether someone sticks to the script that they get given or not. And then also standardized requests, so things like FAQs and so on, which is kind of redundant for people to keep answering. It's very easy to just program a chatbot to do that. So when we started looking at creating this chatbot, the very first thing is we need to figure out who was this chatbot. Because it's one thing to try and figure out the experience, but it doesn't help if you don't know what you're actually making. So because the whole thing about a chatbot is the experience of talking to something. So we need to figure out, first of all, what is his, her, or their personality. How does he, she, or it talk? You'll notice that I'm saying he, she, or it because we didn't know if it was humanoid or a robot. We hadn't decided yet, and we didn't know what would test best with users. And we also didn't know what he, she, or it would look like and what its name would be, or if it had a name. So first of all, we start looking at what his, her, or their personality was and how does he, she, or it talk. So we worked in collaboration with a team at Kapana, which is part of Breakout, and they created these 3 separate personalities, which they created 3 separate conversation flows for, which we then tested with users. And the first one was a very professional one. So it was very professional, hardworking, succinct, no nonsense, just very straightforward. Second personality was very humorous, very sarcastic and dry and witty. And then a very familiar one, which used a lot of emojis. And after testing this with users, this is the feedback that we got. So for the professional, they liked that it was quick, simple, straight to the point, but they didn't like that there was no personal touch. It was too brief, it was impersonal, and they found it quite ambiguous, oddly enough, because it was straightforward. There's a lot of feedback that we got through that was sometimes very distinctly counteracting each other, but you sometimes have to infer why that was. And sometimes just people had different preferences. So for the humorous one, they liked that it was interacting and engaging, but it somehow felt a bit like a secondhand car salesman, trying a bit too hard, trying a bit too much to lay it on thick and to get you to like him. And then with the familiar one, people liked emojis, but they also felt that there were way too many emojis. So we started looking at the fact that we needed to combine these into one, because we were never only going to have one of these personalities. It needed to be a mix of them. But in the end, we found that it would be best to have a humorous tone with a familiar sense to it, a bit of emojis to make it engaging and interactive. But then also, it still needs to have a professional undertone, because it is still insurance and it is still Liberty, which is a heritage brand, and they've been around for 60 years. So we couldn't just completely go the other way. However, one thing we did find is people liked, right at the beginning, when starting the conversation, to be very professional and a bit more formal, because they didn't know what they were talking to in this thing. But then as the conversation carried on, they wanted a bit more personality and a bit more engagement. But we couldn't jump in that right away, correct from the beginning. So first thing we learned while doing tasting was the chatbots should speak in the first person. So originally we wrote the scripts from the point of view of we as Liberty are talking to you. And people were very weirded out by this. They couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that this thing is talking to them like, oh, we are having a great day, how are you? They just went, but this is a single thing we're talking to. So throughout this talk, I'm going to point out things that we learned through testing that we did. And it just drives home the fact that it's so important to, whatever you think or assume, it's important to test that and find out from other people, because like this, for instance, it's not even something we ever thought about, but it came out very clearly that that was an issue. So after knowing the kind of personality that it should have and the way that it should talk, we needed to think, okay, is this humanoid or a robot? And what does he, she, or it look like? Because this is still something that you're going to interact with, that you're going to see. So who of you know what the uncanny valley is? Who have you heard of this term before? Anyone? Yeah, a few people. So the uncanny valley is this idea of, as you interact with something that is human-like but not human, it becomes familiar up to a point, and then it becomes really, really, really creepy when it's clear that it's very humanoid but not actually human. So that's a very good example of that. And we wanted to avoid this in the sense that we didn't want people to ever feel that we were trying to trick them. We didn't ever want to pretend that this was a human talking to you and then not the bot not quite understanding you. We wanted to make it very clear. So for that reason, we decided not to go with any sort of photo for the imagery. We wanted to go with an illustration and also have the bot introduce itself as a bot. So we looked at quite a few different kinds of illustrations, different genders, ethnicities, as well as a robot version, which we then tested with people. And through the testing, this was a combination of subjective preferences as well as testing which had, we call it psychophysiological testing, where they actually put nodes on people's hands to test like blood pressure, things on their head to test like brain waves, whatever. So it's a team at Neuralsense. They're based in Cape Town. They are very lovely to work with. They have all these things that they take measurements with. And then they have a team of psychologists and psychiatrists and behaviorists, which then interpret this and tell you but how people reacted to this, even subconsciously. And it's very interesting sometimes to see how people react to things without them even realizing it. So through a combination of this and subjective preferences, people chose that little guy at the top. Who would have thought that people would want to buy insurance from a man in a suit? Which is the stereotype, but oddly enough, what people actually preferred because it was familiar. So they felt first and foremost that he was professional, formal, he knows what he wants, and he felt friendly and real. So we changed him up a little bit, turned him around so that he was actually looking at the chat bubbles, gave him a nicer haircut and a bit of color. And this is the avatar that we ended up going with. And then after that, we needed to decide whether he had a name. So he does have a name, but at the moment the name's being trademarked, so I can't share it with you. But we went through a whole range of testing with names to see whether it should be a popular human name, whether it should be a colloquial name, a name from literature, etc. And we ended up going with something a bit more abstract that is related to liberty. So hopefully in a month or two you'll be able to see it. So after creating this personality and knowing what this bot was and who he was and how he spoke and what he looked like, we needed to create an interface. Now, an interface, it both needs to be a beautiful thing that you want to see and interact with, but especially in the sense for chatbot, it very much aids in the way that you understand or don't understand the way that you're interacting, the way that you interact. So this was, back in the day, my very first stab at the designs. Don't judge me too much. We tried something completely different with the chatbots, like odd shapes, which tie back to some of Liberty's shapes that they use. And this just came out, people thought it was way too weird, it wasn't recognizable as chat bubbles, etc. So and there's always a debate for creating something completely brand new or sticking with something which is a bit more standard. And this is a good example of that, where people felt that this is innovative, but it's strange. This is something new I'm going to have to learn to interact with. Whereas if you give them something that they already know, it might not be the newest thing or the most innovative thing they've seen, but they'll know how to interact with, and there's no learning curve to it there. So after that, we went through many, many, many more versions of iterations of designs. This is about, I think, a quarter or a fifth of all the screens that we actually designed in order to test. And when we tested them, we gave the users single screens to look at, and we used eye mapping software to first of all see where they were looking. And it was interesting to see how many people didn't notice the input bars right at the bottom of the screen, because the way that it was shapes and the colors that we were using was not helping them to understand that this was a space to interact with. And then in terms of the testing that Neuralsense also helped us with, they looked at the engagement and also the cognitive workload. So they also have very complicated ways to figure this out, to see how difficult it is for people to actually understand what's happening on a screen, which was very helpful for us to then narrow down designs, combine them, test them again, combine them, test them again. And then now I can show you guys what we actually ended up going with. So this is a demo from my phone now. So I can show you, just take you through the initial quick quote process. So live demos are always terrifying, but this ought to be relatively stable. And I'll just take you through the quick quote process, which will take about 5 minutes. So I'm going to not finish the quick quote that I did previously. So this is a carousel that you can use if you've been in the process before. There's different things you can do. So I want to get a quick quote right now. So the screen that we used, we went with a very white layered background for the bot messages, and then a completely different color which stands out in terms of the blue for the user messages. So this is a familiar color palette, and we found that this very big contrast actually helped people the most in terms of understanding who the message came from. Now, in a chatbot, lots of messages get very frustrating very quickly, and that is, so projects are always work in progress. So we're still looking at that initial beginning of the messages because it is still quite long, a lot to read. But in order to help people to break it up a bit and to give you an idea of what you need to do next, I've added this little GIF which gives you an instruction of what to do. So we need to scan or capture your your driver's license disc. So you can either take a photo, upload a photo, or type it yourself. So I have my license disc here, so we're going to use the camera. So I'm scanning the license disc. So please don't steal my identity because this has my ID number and lovely things like that on here, just saying. So it scans the barcode, tells me, okay, great, it managed to read it. Like, yes, it managed to get my details correct. We decided to use imagery very sparingly and in order to break up the conversation. So little things like that, saying like, okay, great, well done. People reacted very positively to that because it tells you, okay, I've done it correctly. It's a bit of positive reinforcement to continue the process. So nextly, we need my car license disc info, which I also have here. Okay. So again, small little emojis just bringing in to add a bit of information and a bit of enjoyment in there. So once we have the car, we now just need a bit more detail on this specific model, which is a drop down, again, to make it a bit easier. So throughout this whole process, we've tried to limit absolutely the amount of plain input boxes that you have because it's frustrating. So, and people can also easily get that wrong. So here, yes, I live wherever that was. So Google Maps in order to drop a pin for your home address. Again, a nice little thing to add in that people don't have to type their addresses, and a way for us to actually validate whether they are entering a legitimate address. So I'm not going to do a credit check. So all of this, we've tried to keep the conversation as well conversational as possible. It's very easy to fall into a very formal, very static way of talking. But again, this is insurance. It's a grudge purchase. It's not something people actually ever want to do. It's something you need to do. So the whole idea with this chatbot was to add a bit of enjoyment to just make it a bit simpler for people. That if you're sitting in the train, if you're waiting for a coffee somewhere, you can just quickly go through this process. It's not this whole thing of having to call a call center agent. And unfortunately, there are many, many questions that do need to be answered in order to be in compliance with the underwriting rules. But again, hopefully this makes it a bit easier and it avoids the fact that people don't like talking to people nowadays. I mean, I saw yesterday, even ABSA has introduced a WhatsApp bot that you can now do banking through. So yeah. So again, on here, you have a lot of text, and unfortunately, it's sometimes difficult to avoid. Here, for instance, you need to explain the different kinds of ways that you can use your car. So in order to decide which one it truly is, because people don't generally talk about, oh, I only use my car for social, for business or occasional business. So it's sometimes necessary to explain those, but again, this might be better utilized in a different way. Okay, so no extra fittings. Again, so just the conversation there. Have you added extra fittings? We're talking spoilers and refracts, not eyelashes and headlights. we usually get a little bit of a giggle from people when they're testing it, because it's just adding in that bit of humor, making it a bit more enjoyable to interact with. Now this is a lot of text coming through, but this was actually a specific decision, because all of these are assumptions that we make about people. And through research with the BAs, they found that majority of people would say, yes, these assumptions are correct. And for instance, you're the regular driver, you've never rebuilt your car, you haven't been convicted of a crime. So the vast majority of people say yes, so it eliminates a lot of answers that you need to give. So then after this ought to give me my quote for my car. And then for the quote, we've also decided to add in a, okay, I need to set privacy declarations first. Again, lovely legal jargon, which we've tried to simplify as much as possible. And we've tried to remove most of the jargon from the process though. So for the quote as well, we decided to make it in a little GIF that's a bit more engaging and exciting and allows people to stop and realize the information that they're seeing. Because if you just put that in a simple text box, people would just skim through it as well. So then the second one is there's a specific, they offer a driving test with telemetry, which is built into the app. And if you do that, you can save a bit of money. So also just a bit of entertainment to add in the little GIF there. Okay, so now you guys have seen what this actually looks like. Now I can show you the rest of the things that we actually learned through this process. So our chatbot functions across 3 different platforms for now. There's 3 different places you can chat to it. And I say for now because WhatsApp has just released the API for business. So we want to move into the WhatsApp space as well. But for now, it functions on Facebook Messenger, the native app, and website. Now, this becomes very tricky because you have very different levels of control over the UX on different platforms. On Facebook Messenger, you have absolute minimal control over it. Who have you ever interacted with some sort of bot on Facebook Messenger? Okay, a few of you. So you'll know that there are very limited interactions that you can choose from. And I'll take you through them in just a bit. On the website, you have a lot more control over it, but certain things like the camera that you use for scanning your license, you can't do. So on the native app, you have full control over that. So what also makes it tricky is there are no set standards for chatbot experiences. There are no Google material standards for this process. It is something that is very much still evolving and being figured out. So the 2 main forms of chatbot experiences that you get is a free-form input. So this is a little bot on Facebook called Hipmunk. They're a travel agency in the US, and they use neuro-linguistic understanding. So you can type in a conversation to them. So you can say, non-stop flight on American Airlines from New York to Amsterdam. This is a conversation I actually had with it. And it picks up keywords, and it gives you results based on that. But you need quite a lot of machine learning and AI in the back end in order to do that. Ours doesn't quite have that yet. Yeah, I'm lying. Ours has none of that yet, which is something that we do still want to add at some point, which is why we went with these guided response inputs. So whatever the question is that we're asking you, we make it context specific and give you options to choose from which relate to that. So the freeform input, the person is control of the conversation. They can change the conversation at any point, but there's a high potential for people to get it wrong because there are no guides. It can be confusing because if you can ask everything, what do you ask? You don't necessarily know where you can start. But it's very easy to change the conversation. If you suddenly want to start booking a hotel room instead of booking flights, it's very simple to just do that. Whereas with the guided response inputs, there's a limited section that you can choose from, but there's a low potential for error. So we can guide people and there's a clear path to the conversation. But it's difficult to change the conversation though. I'll get to how we did that in a bit. Okay. That wasn't meant to happen. Has this thing now decided again? Is it rebooting or what? That's beeping. Maybe just turn it off and on again. maybe down there as well. So sorry for the people that are dialing in, the projector just died, so we'll be with you in a second. So I'm sure all of you have been able to see that creating a chatbot experience is very different from creating any other kind of website or app, because it's a completely linear flow of information. We have included other elements, which I'll show you, where it doesn't make sense to have it in a conversation. But it's sometimes very tempting and very dangerous to try and just say, oh, but we have this nice chatbot, we'll just put everything in there. But if you have a list of FAQs and it's 5 pages long, that makes no sense to put in a chatbot, because people don't like reading, ironically enough, as we found out as well. Okay, we're back. So for the guided response inputs, there are, as you saw now, there are a few different ones that we used. Buttons, there is an input box for your name, for instance. There are cell options for menu. Buttons that we added a hierarchy to as well. So you'll see that we always put the one that is preferred, or that generally furthers the conversation the best. Not the best. The one that people tend to use the most, we've added the hierarchy to and made that white, outlined the rest. And then also type ahead inputs where we allow options to display. And then the other 2 platforms as well, Facebook Messenger and the website. So as I said, Facebook Messenger has very limited interactions to choose from. You have image replies, buttons that you can choose from, quick replies, and then carousel buttons. And that's pretty much it. There are a few variations to these, but there are none of the other nice ones that we had. And it always has the static input box at the bottom, which makes it very tricky because our bot doesn't understand freeform input if you give it at the wrong point in the conversation. Now, the different platforms have very different experiences, unfortunately, and you can change conversation at any point between any of them, and it'll remember your conversation and pick it up again. So this is for the driver's license disk uploading it. That's it in Facebook Messenger on the website. And then on the native app, you have the option to take it with the camera as well. Now, with the date input, it's drastically different. Because for Facebook Messenger, we have to give you a suggestion on how to actually input the format. Otherwise, it won't process it correctly. For the website, we use a calendar. This is for web, mobile, as well as the desktop website. People are very used to interacting with calendars in that platform. Whereas on the native app, people have gotten used to their phones' calendars. Now, and I'll get to this in the next point, you'll notice this is the iOS calendar on mobile. And the reason for that is we were stuck with using we used a hybrid app, which can only use one interface. So we couldn't develop for Android and iOS and stick to what people were used to on each platform. We could only choose one, and we went with iPhone because that tested the best. So who of you know React Native or hybrid apps in general? Okay, a few of you. So React Native is a, and I'm going to forget the word here, framework. It's a framework that you can use in order to develop native apps. However, you develop one thing and it splits it out to iOS and Android. You don't have development for each of those. Now, this becomes problematic because iOS standards and Android standards are drastically different. And now you have one app which people use on different platforms having the same experience. So our app has different elements from both, which is not ideal in terms of an experience perspective, but it does make the development time of the app quite a lot quicker. So another challenge that we ran into, which is very ironic for a chatbot, which is mostly text, is people don't read and they don't like reading. So as I mentioned earlier, we used images sparingly to focus attention. So this kind of GIF, which is instructional to help people understand what they're meant to do, instead of just adding all of it in a block of text. So something that we found while testing as well is people were confused by the camera orientation. The very first version that we had, at that little image on the left, which had your camera license, your camera disc this way around, and people then took the photo in that orientation, which was problematic because our scanners, it was too small for the scanners to properly pick up. Now, in our minds, we figured, oh, but it's simple, you know, just turn the camera. We thought it was so obvious and logical, but then just because you think it's obvious, it really doesn't mean it is. And that's one of, if you remember anything from today or tonight, please remember this. Whatever you think might be the most obvious thing on earth, most people probably won't think of it. And this is why. And this is genuinely my favorite gift on earth, and I think I use it in pretty much every presentation. And it's just the perfect example of the fact that you immediately think, like, but this is so simple. Why can't you just figure it out? But people will find a way to use the thing that you've made in ways that you never even dreamed of. So give people the benefit of the doubt and test it and see where it's going wrong. But then, bearing that in mind, I truly believe that there's no such thing as user error. If people can't use the thing you've made and they can't figure it out, it means that you've done something wrong. Even if it's the smallest hint that you need to give them so that to help them understand what to do, you need to help guide them. So for the camera, what we did is we changed the orientation of that image to actually show it upright. And then people found it very obvious to, oh, they should just take it in that orientation because it then matched the image that they saw. Or additionally, you can turn it, and then there's a message at the top which then tells you, gives you additional information on what to do. So through doing that, we found that it actually really helped to eliminate that problem. So as I mentioned earlier, with these very specific inputs that we give people, you can't just change the conversation through the input box. So in order to solve this, there we go, we added a picker menu at the bottom. So there's a little menu that you can drag up, and you can change the conversation at the bottom. You can ask for help, you can ask for more information, etc. So with a bot, another problem, especially a bot that is like ours, which is not that intelligent just yet, the bot has a very large potential for getting things wrong and for misunderstanding things. So this is a conversation I had with it where I was trying to log in, and this is a button you press which says I'm new here. And it told me it had trouble validating my name, even though I didn't enter a name. So when it gets to this kind of thing, people can very easily become very frustrated. So one of the first things that we always knew that we were going to do was to always allow instant access to a real person. So that's part of the picker menu at the bottom right there. You can say I want to talk to a person. So this switches you through to call center, chat center, which is then a real human that talks to you. Unfortunately, however, only during office hours. Because again, call centers don't, or this call center doesn't function at night. And then there are issues like this, where because our bot is not very intelligent just yet, you can tell it whatever you want to, and it just goes ahead. So another reason for why it's kind of important to add some basic logic for it to understand what's going on. But yeah, he's just not quite that smart just yet. And I just found this very entertaining. So as I mentioned, we added this picker menu right at the bottom so you can change conversation. Now, after implementing it, not even user testing, just the devs on my team that were working with it pointed out to me that this was really hard to use. So this was the very first iteration that I designed of it. I figured, oh, it's nice and compact and clean. And those of you that have iOS will know the second you try and swipe up from the bottom, your entire screen menu comes up. So we very quickly had to revise that. So added a lot more padding, a lot more space. So the team is actually working on redesigning that because it takes up a lot of space for something that should just be a very simple interaction. And again, because we didn't, it's not something that I ever foresaw being an issue, but once people actually started using it, we noticed it was. And then Apple came with this lovely thing end of last year, which cuts right into exactly the space that we're trying to use. So another reason why we are redoing this. So we can add padding at the bottom, but then you end up with the thing that's like this thing, which just completely ruins your screen space. So another thing that I learned is that as a UX designer or just any kind of designer, it's important to know that these really cool, lovely little interactions that you find on the net, your devs will most likely hate them. So this was a very cool reference that I found for that bottom thing. The devs just looked at me, they're like, that's nice. And so, yeah, they very nicely informed me that they could try and explore this, but it'll probably take a month or so because they have way too much actual functionality to work on. So we eventually compromised and didn't do it. So it's very important to know. It's very easy to get caught up in just seeing these really beautiful things. You go, but it's so nice, I want to include that in mine. It's not always feasible. And it's not that your devs are being difficult or that they don't like you. It's really going to add a lot of complexity to their lives. And this doesn't actually add that much to the app itself. So as I mentioned earlier, it's very easy to, when you have a specific platform you're working on, try and push everything in there. And in this case, no, everything shouldn't be a conversation. We do have a burger menu as well, which houses a whole area of information about the product, about how everything works. As I mentioned, there's a whole area for driver telematics. So it tracks your driving each trip. It gives you a rating. You can see your trips. You can see the driving test, questions about it. Once you've passed the test, you can claim Uber vouchers from it. None of that would work in a conversation. And it would feel very awkward trying to fit it in there. And then also, once you start claiming for friends, the claims process does not work in the chat bubble. It's just simply too complicated. So another thing that we ran into was logging in, because you can log in on different platforms and continue the same conversation. And we didn't just want to use a standard modal screen or whatever. We wanted to stick to the chat conversation in this case, because we felt that it could work. So a very simple solution and very much a conversation again. So the bot simply asks you, are you new here or have we met before? And the logic is that if you're new, you're a new user, so you need to sign up. And if you've already met, then you're a returning user, you want to log in. So if you're new, it starts a bit more formal. So like I said earlier, it changes the conversation tone. So it's great, I'm here to help you purchase comprehensive car insurance. Can you tell me your first name? So it's a bit more formal and professional and a bit more informative. Whereas if you're a returning customer, it just jumps right in. It's like, oh, sorry for the formality. I meet a lot of people. It's great to have you back. Can I have your phone number to sign you in? And it just gets straight to the point. Now, with a chatbot, because it's to us with the conversation that you're interacting with, it seems like a very linear process. So it seems very quick to just say, oh, okay, well, we just want to change this order a bit. We're going to move this question to there and this question to there. However, the team that we've worked with, Fearsome Engine, who did the backend bot capabilities, this is their chat flow for the backend, just for the vehicle license disk. So just for scanning this. Because there are positive flows, there are negative flows, there are alternative flows. If something fails, it needs to give error messages. And as you can see, it cuts off on the side there. It's even wider than this. So it's not a quick change. So as designers, it's often very easy to think, oh, but it's just a quick thing you need to do. It's really not. You don't necessarily always understand the complexity behind it. So this is for the vehicle license disk. That is for scanning this guy. Because you can do the camera scanning, you can do uploading, you can do manual input, there's negative flows, and there are error messages. So it becomes very complicated very quickly, and you know how long that whole chat conversation was for the quick quote. After that, there's policy fulfillment, so you can actually take out a policy on the app. So it becomes a lot more complicated very quickly. So just quickly changing things around is not really that quick. So another thing that people sometimes gloss over, and which is easily forgotten, is accessibility. So not just designing for able-bodied people, which is sometimes easy to forget if you are not disabled, but it doesn't have to be so big a thing as a lot of people think. It's as simple as taking the color palette that you're using and So on Photoshop, we ran it through different filters, color blindness, because Photoshop has that built in. There are also quite a few tools online that you can use for just quickly checking color palettes. And for us, it was specifically checking the red, yellow, and green of the driving test, making sure that the contrast between each of those was big enough that people could still see what the difference was. And we were very happy to see that the spot color blue, the third one from the left there, that we used, held up very well for the test and was still very distinct. And then also just taking different pages from the actual app and running that through the color blindness filter, and just making sure that the contrasts were working and that things didn't get lost. Then also just things as simple as adding the little icon at the top, little thumbs up, and not just having a color, because that color to someone who's colorblind means nothing, because they don't know if it's red, green, or yellow. So the little thumbs up there just helps. It's just a little signifier to help people understand. Then I asked my team, okay, so now we've considered colorblind people, and what about screen readers for blind people? There sort of was a bit of an awkward silence. They looked at me and they said, we should probably not be selling car insurance to blind people. Yeah, so this first version of the product is only aimed at people who are the regular drivers of their car. So you can't insure a car for someone else. But they did assure me that for future versions, when multiple drivers have been added in, as well as building insurance and home contents insurance, we will add in screen reader part, because then it is actually something that blind people might be able to use. So just a few last thoughts. So in our company, we work very closely together, devs and designers. And it's really taught me that just knowing and trusting the devs that you work with, it really leads to better implementation. Because if I tell my devs that, listen, this thing that you're making now, I really need you to find a way to put this in, because this is really integral to this interaction. They understand that I'm not just being difficult and fussy. They understand that this is something that's truly important. And in the same way, if they come to me and they say, listen, this thing, like that little slidey thing that I wanted, this is really going to be difficult to implement. Do you truly need this? I can consider and I can tell them, okay, no, I would like to have it, but I understand I'm not going to complicate your lives for something that is not truly integral to what we're doing. So it's that mutual respect and compromise that you need to find. And a lot of these things that were built in, the nice techie parts, so scanning your license and being able to find your address on Google Maps, those are not things that I initially thought of, because my brain doesn't necessarily always work in the tech space. I don't know about some of the cool tech that comes out. So the devs were able to recommend to me solutions that I didn't even know existed. So being able to talk about things before they get implemented, it leads to better solutions in the end. So next up, what we want to do is, like I mentioned, natural language understanding, that the bot can actually be able to handle conversations which are not just guided. Looking at the WhatsApp platform, quite a few UX improvements, as I mentioned, additional products which will be building insurance and home contents insurance, and full product suites launching later this year. And yeah, any questions? I like questions.
Sure, so
Yes.
Pleasure. So you talked about the kind of flow diagram. That's kind of a logic component to that, and then there's a language component. That requires different skills. So one person is going to do business analysis, okay, logical flow, this, okay, then yes, no. And somebody else is going, okay, how do I apply solar tools? Did you do that all in one kind of one thing, or did you have a collaboration? Or did you use different stuff?
So we have one team, but different parts to the team. So we have business analysts that have to go, because they have to go and look at what are the compliance rules, what are the actual business requirements. Then they'll map out and say, okay, but you need a question asking for vehicle license disc. Then we need approval or rejection. And so they'll map out, and also the systems that it needs to go to, because Liberty is underwritten by Standard Bank. So everything that goes through Liberty has to go to Standard Bank first and then come back. So that's a very complicated system that works together. But so the business analyst would write that. Then we had a copywriter as well who'd go and flesh out and say, okay, but so she is the embodiment of the bot, essentially. she adds the personality and the conversation to it, and then the team goes and adds it into the actual logic. Yeah, I can't.
She's doing that on a different, not on the same tool.
Yeah, no. So she tends to write the copy decks in Google Docs, because while she's writing the copy, it needs to be approved by the product owner and the client, and then the business analyst to make sure that the conversation is actually still following the right logic. So it is such a complicated system, so many checks all along the way. But in the end, there's no one thing that you can use to put it all together, unfortunately. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. So that's a good question, actually. Let me find an example for you. So if you look there, there's a tiny little edit pencil right there. So you can go back one, if whatever you've selected, you can go back one question and go and edit that and re-answer that. Because we did find that people sometimes chose the wrong thing. They're like, oh, wait, I didn't read that properly. So you can go back one question. It was a business decision to not allow people to go back further than that, because otherwise they might get a quote and say like, oh, wait, but what if I answer this differently? And then they just go right back to the beginning and redo it. You can restart the quote, but you can't manually go question by question back, if I can put it that way. But yeah, so we did consider that, because, I mean, human error, people, like I said, people don't read. So they sometimes skim through it, answer it, they're like, oh, wait, I chose the wrong one there. So yeah. No, we don't have any functionality for that at the moment. So it's only the interaction that you would need to press the buttons or click the buttons, actually. Yeah. Ooh. I genuinely have no idea what the concurrency thing is at the moment, but I don't know that they've run into any issues. So there's, to my knowledge, there isn't a limit, but I'm not a dev, so I do stand corrected on that. But I haven't heard of any issues like that. The only issue I do know of is the day that very first time we launched this within Liberty, because when you log in, it sends you an OTP. Yeah, we ran out of credits for the OTP, so people were getting error messages, and they just had to add like 1,000 Rand to the OTP service so that people can get that again. It's the only thing I know of. Mm. Okay. 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 No, and unfortunately that's true. If people have had that experience once, they won't want to go back, even if you fix it. So no, that's very valuable. Like I know the devs have been playing around with it, just exploring it, but I haven't seen it yet. So I'll mention to them to just keep an eye on that. Yes.
So in terms of the client generated data, how safe is it? Because in my head, I'm thinking, how sure is it that this chatbot can detect if it's a chatbot?
Say that again?
So this is a chatbot designed to be used by humans. So what if it's another chatbot designed to other groups to create data? How safe is the client generated?
That I genuinely can't answer you, unfortunately. Sorry, just because I'm not a dev, I have no idea about the security that went into this, but I would like to believe that the devs have kept it very safe. Yeah. I believe in my devs, and I believe that they managed, they thought of this, but I genuinely can't tell you, unfortunately. But I can tell you, if a different chatbot would like to take out insurance, it's more than welcome, as long as he has a valid credit card. Yeah.
So we have developed this element test participants.
No, because we always start the conversation with, so right at the top there you'll see it says Liberty Short-Term Bot, and it always says, hello, welcome to the Liberty Short-Term. Okay, they've changed the copy a bit now to say, I'm a bot that's here to help give you the best experience. So if people don't read, then unfortunately, then I can't guarantee that they won't know it's a bot, but we have tried our best to make it as obvious as possible. We've tried to never actually mislead people into thinking that it might be. So, but we didn't have any experiences where people did think it was a person. Yeah. Sorry, say again? Trying to think. I don't think there is a backup version. The deploys happen in a very staggered way, though, because they are the actual chatbot that you're talking to and the bot connector that puts it through to the front end, two very different systems, and they work on separate versions a lot of the time. So again, not a dev, so I can't give you quite answers on, but I'm sure that if there ever were an issue and the bot were down, they would revert it to QA most likely, which is mostly stable, and it would be for a very short time if that were to happen. Yes. Yes, so the business analyst would map out the very basic structure of what would be necessary from a compliance version. And then we would usually sit with the client and our copywriter and say, okay, these questions make more sense grouped together. So for instance, there's a question about whether you're married. At one point, that was right at the beginning of the conversation, and people were very weirded out by it because it's the first thing it asked you, and it makes no sense. So we changed the structure a bit and moved a lot of things around because it's a conversation. We've found many times that people found certain groupings of questions awkward, even though logically they maybe made sense. So this flow has moved around a lot, which is why I know what the back-end system of that looks like, because at one point they were like, guys, this is not that difficult, not that easy to change in an instant. So, because the business analysts don't necessarily consider the experience when they're writing it. To them, they just want to get the basic logic structure of what needs to be there, but then we fine-tune it and see. But and sometimes there are even questions can be combined, which makes better sense in that way. Yes, yeah. So if there is a question that requires a new UI element, we would design that. Otherwise, we would tell the devs, okay, this one needs to be a carousel input. And then they just pull the same structure that they already have. So it's not a new component they have to design, or code at least.
All of your UI elements were compatible with other channels like this.
Yes.
Like a checkbox, which doesn't.
So for the very first version of the app that of the conversation that we did, the bot couldn't differentiate between which channel it was on. So for that specific reason, we only stuck to elements that Facebook Messenger had, because we had to send the exact same tags through to all three channels. So we couldn't use things like checkboxes. They have now implemented a way to differentiate between them. So now we are slowly adding more complex elements. So there's a section where you can add additional fittings to your car. So that gets very complicated very quickly, because you need to be able to filter by the section that you're looking for, then the specific components, etc. And then there are also options that you can tick on and off, whether you want, so after you have your policy, if you want to what do you call it, a courtesy car if you've been in an accident, things like that. So we are now slowly adding more complex elements. And what makes it frustrating on Facebook Messenger is that very often then becomes a breakout page. So
that's how you deal with that. So we brought you the great experience here with Facebook Messenger.
So at this point, it's how we're handling it, because Facebook Messenger, we did initially build for the lowest common denominator, and we realized the experience is then kind of really broken and hampered. And we're shooting ourselves in the foot to cater for something which the vast minority of people are using it. I think 2 months ago, we only had 6 people that interacted with Facebook Messenger since February. So we're now focusing a lot more on the app and the website.
And I suppose also the logic to try to build out all of those flows.
Yes.
In a checkbox.
Yeah, it just becomes very cumbersome because if you're trying to find a workaround for an element which isn't there, you're ending up with a really bad experience that works, as opposed to a web breakout page, which is not ideal, but it's a short annoyance for something that actually works. Something like when you have the car you're looking for, you have a type ahead drop down, which you can't have on Facebook Messenger. So that's a breakout page. Otherwise, we can't verify the car model that you have. So, yeah.
Type ahead drop down is a bit like
yeah, so it's exactly that. So it's as you're typing, it gives you suggestions. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so the way that we've done that is we have 3 designers working on this project, and they work very closely together. So each one is then responsible for not for a platform, but for a set of functionality. So if one person is responsible for, I'm building the new feature for claims, they need to check then how it works across all 3 platforms, because they're very, they know how it's supposed to function. So it's not about the platform, it's about the actual feature, which, and I've come across certain companies handle it differently, where a team is responsible for platform, where it becomes very easy to become disjointed in terms of the conversation. And then we also have one copywriter, which works on the different things. So then the designer, the UX designer, needs to go to the copywriter and say, okay, so for Facebook Messenger, this is going to have to work different. How do you think we can work that into the copy? So it's just a way of keeping everything consolidated, just getting everyone to talk to each other, to be honest. Because it's very easy to become very fragmented very quickly if people don't talk to each other and just do their own thing. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes. So that is a bit of a hit and miss, to be honest. We've gone through different, it's not on the screen. We have gone through a lot of different iterations of what that should look like and different kinds of elements that we designed for the bottom. In the end, this is the one on the right that tested the best. It was the clearest to people that it was something that could move upwards. But even then, it wasn't entirely clear. So that's, again, another reason why we're re-looking at as a bit more of a menu element, which then becomes complicated because you have the burger menu in the top left, which houses all of your non-conversational items, whereas the menu at the bottom, we call them quick replies. So it's something that you can just quickly interact with to change the conversation itself. So we're still working on how to differentiate those with very different functionalities while still making it very clear that these are different things you can interact with. Yeah. So the very initial, I started on this project in August last year, and the very first iteration of it launched in February. So that's when we had this look and feel and functionality. Yeah, was a lot of blood, sweat and tears to get to that process. Most of the devs didn't really sleep or go on holiday in December. or January. Yeah. And no, the past few months have been mostly adding a lot more functionality onto the project, and new conversation flows, which is then for the additional products. Yes.
Are you doing user analytics or A/B testing on what's live already?
We're not doing any A/B testing. They are doing a lot of user analytics in terms of to see drop-off points in the conversation, points where people get confused. Yeah, I haven't looked at those in a while, but I know that they are collecting data on that.
So the testing that you're doing, continue to do usability testing.
So usability testing is both. It depends on the specific phase of the project, but we are doing testing on the entire project, the entire conversation, because that always needs tweaking and tuning, and then as well as specific new features, we'll test prototypes. So before it goes into development, we'll test the prototypes, and they will often do A/B testing, do different designs and see which one works the best. So we try and do A/B testing before it actually gets to development. Otherwise, it's adding time and complexity to the devs, and luckily they have nothing else to do, right? So, yes. Absolutely no idea, I'm afraid. Yeah. That I'm afraid I have no idea. Like I haven't looked at WhatsApp at all. So yeah, that's actually another interesting thing just in terms of the response for the chat bubbles. So it was interesting to try and get the timing right between each chat bubble that gets served. So the devs eventually worked in logic so that there is a time delay. If there are two messages, two chat bubbles after one another, the second bubble, the time that it's delayed by, is determined by a fraction of a second per each character on this message. So it'll work out, you need this fraction of a second to read each character, theoretically. So depending on how much text is on a chat bubble, that delays the next chat bubble to give you time to read it. Because if you get a long list of chat bubbles, no one's going to read that, you just read the last one. So that also requires a bit of tweaking still. Sometimes it comes through a bit fast. Yeah, so again, something that we realized with testing. And then, the devs obviously put the time delays off while they're working. So otherwise they wait forever. And then they once accidentally pushed it to, I think, to prod without the time delay, and people were so confused because messages were just coming through like this. But we very instantly realized it. We're just like, oh, wait, right. So we have encountered that before when there is very bad signal. It also takes the messages very long. We had that during a demo at one of the Liberty branches once. It took about 2 to 3 minutes per message to come through. And yeah. And it's very difficult because the logic, the bot can't necessarily notice that this is happening because it's waiting for the previous message to be sent. It's very difficult for it to realize how long it's taking to send because it's not built to actually notice that. So what we have made is when the network is very bad, specifically the images take very long to send. So we have built-in loading bars for the images though. So that just gives you an indication that something is still happening because the images don't have the little wavy thingy, whatever you call that. So then it's difficult to realize something's happening. Otherwise, it's just the little dots going through. But that is a good point that it's something important to remember that people will at some point just rage quit and stop using the thing. We didn't do surveys or really focus groups. The business analysts did a lot of that before I joined the project. So in terms of the information that we needed, when we tested the apps and every time we did usability testing, we would also have a bit of an informal chat with people afterwards to understand what they liked and didn't like about the conversation. And very often we found that there was jargon people were getting hung up on. So when you're working on a project, it's so easy to become used to the acronyms and the jargon and forget that these are not normal everyday words. So a lot of that we ended up changing just from realizing that these are things that people don't understand. And one of the big things that our client also wanted to add in here was the transparency. It's the idea that when they started realizing this, they're like, okay, we're going to make a point of not talking in big words. We're not going to use typical jargon that people won't understand. We want to make it as plain and straightforward as possible. So yeah.
How do you maintain the conversation? So you know, that you use things, but sort of feedback sexual
so that is something that still needs to be built in, that we have designed, is if there's a user drop off, so if someone doesn't talk to the bot for, I can't remember the time limit, like 24 hours or something like that, or after someone's gotten quotes or after they've gotten policy, we want to send them feedback or feedback form. To say, like, so how did you find this conversation? What were there parts of it that frustrated you? What parts do you think we can improve on? Because I think those kinds of things are very useful to hear in the end, actually. I don't think that has been included yet, but I think it is very important to hear from people, because people love telling you when they're upset. So, and if people have stopped using something, they will tell you, or hopefully, why they stopped using it, and you know there are specific points that you need to focus on and look at. No.
You have like an option in the chatbot where they could actually say if things are working, except for like the help section, or when they can immediately give feedback. I'm just thinking afterwards, if you send an email at a later stage, they would have completely forgotten what happened during that moment. It needs to be
so it needs to be built into that carousel message, carousel menu, that's the word, right in the beginning, the option to give feedbacks, because otherwise if you wait too long, people won't give feedback or they'll forget why they were upset with it. So that is, like I said, something that is still being built in. The designs are there, it's one of those things that's deprioritized because functionality needs to be built first. So sometimes convincing business that getting feedback is difficult when they have functionality that they want to build for a release. I'm sure you've all know this.
So everything that you always want to do for time being is just based on the topics that you see. So you've got to guess why.
So when we do find that in the user testing we do ask people, but because we do often have people that get confused at points in the conversation and drop off at the exact same points. And then we'll just ask them, but why specifically this is happening. Yeah.
I think you also mentioned that you say something about and it's going to be awesome. About a bit about the process and how you
So the copywriters that we were working with and the team that worked around creating this personality, they came up with a whole long list of names. The devs came up with names, we came up with names, the clients came up with names. There was a whole process of everyone got involved with names. And they tended to fall into very specific groups. So some of it was popular names, some of it was names from fiction or from literature. Some of it was Greek mythological names, things like that. And then there were also a few names where they the copywriters got a bit more abstract, and so a bit more agnostic names that related to liberty in some way. And we tested these different sets of names with people, and then also related to the avatar that was chosen to see which ones people felt fit and which ones they would buy insurance from, quite frankly. And yeah, the one that they chose in the end was a bit more agnostic, a bit more abstract, not related to a person, which then also helps to not name the bot as human. Yeah. So that was a lot more subjective. So not necessarily actually using neurological testing, just more subjective of who would you want to buy insurance from. Okay, thank you very much, guys. It was lovely having you here tonight and presenting for you. I hope you all learned something, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Let's just move to the next one. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to go through this last part here where we can let you know what to expect for the next round. Retro Rabbit next month, not next month? Yeah, next month is September, yeah. Just check on the meetup page for Rabbiteer sessions to get the latest update. The latest meetup hasn't been added yet, but if you subscribe at least to that page, then you'll get the info that you need when it's available. As for the IDF meetup page, you can also find that on Meetup. It's IXDJHP. And then some admin. There are some job openings available. So if you are interested for either full-time contract or volunteer positions, please contact info@designnerd, that's designer with a D at the end, .co.za. And yeah, I will send out this video, this document with resources to you at a later stage, or later this evening. I'll just put it on Meetup. Sorry. I'll just put that on Meetup, where you'll be able to, go through this yourself, where you can see some info. So because not all of us are devs, there are also options around where you can create chatbots for yourself without any coding. So there's just some resources that you can have a look at, as well as where you can learn more about how to create a chatbot on Udemy and Coursera. They've got like building a chatbot for dummies. And if you want to learn more about the foundational principles for creating awesome designs, understanding certain things like affordances, usability, and the psychology behind great design, then you can check out Interaction Design Foundation if you'd like to learn like a bit deeper than that. And then there's also some links and resources available, but I'll send this link to you a bit later. And yeah, thank you to everybody who attended, and especially Liz for this awesome topic. Okay.